Are you ready to dominate? Because it's time. From Philly to Vegas, Canada to Peru, and everywhere in between. It's time for the podcast that makes the offseason suck a hell of a lot less. From the creators of Dynasty Depot, the internet's only live auction site for Dynasty fantasy football teams. Here's your hosts, Nelson Verbit and Rick Taylor.
Yo, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of Dynasty Depot Live-ish. Not-ish tonight. We are live, and we are happy to be here. I would like to introduce my co-host for this evening, the king of crab cakes, the crusader in the custom red Jeep, my friend, my partner, my co-host, Ruthless Rick Taylor. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, what's up, Nels?
How are you, buddy?
Always excited to hear what you're going to come up with on the intro.
Well, I'll try to keep it interesting, my friend, and you deserve all the accolades because nobody eats more crab cakes than you, and who else do I know has got the custom red Jeep, brother?
That's right.
It's good stuff. Hey, Rick, I got a question for you, man.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know what a reverse raise is?
I do not.
Okay. So a reverse raise is somebody that works for you, obviously, that you have to give a raise. But instead of just, having them complain or you give them the raise, you give them more work to do. So it actually works out for you. So it's kind of like a reverse raise, right?
Okay, yeah.
Our new co-host, I guess, is up for a reverse raise because customer relations, customer service, email stuff, producer, and now our co-host, Rick. The duct tape that holds Dynasty Depot together. Fantasy Heather, welcome.
Thank you.
The reverse raise. What's it like to get a reverse raise, Heather?
I mean, it's the first I've heard of this. I should probably Google it quick or something. So reverse raise sounds like it's bad for me, good for you.
Well, technically, it's good for you because you're probably up for a raise, but it's good for us because you were underpaid already. Now we're going to get you up to par. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And you notice that there's no smile on Rick's face because we're talking about giving away money again.
He's doing some math over here.
Rick heard the word raise and he was like,
Yeah. So, tonight we have a very special guest. Again, we keep getting the guests. They're lining up to get on this show. I don't know why, but it's what's happening right now. So this guy, Rick, Heather, this guy's 33 years old, right? He's written 3 books, and it's kind of a cool number because I've only read 3 books in my lifetime. 3. How about you, Heather? You read a lot? No, Rick, read a little bit.
I do.
Yeah, I read a little bit.
Yeah, you read a little bit. This guy's written 3 books. I've been on other shows with him, and his information is amazing. It's like nothing you get anywhere else. You just don't get this. This isn't a, hey, what do you think Miles Sanders is worth? We're not talking about that stuff. We're going to dig into numbers and analytics of Dynasty with this young man. He is Jordan McNamara. Welcome, my friend.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here. Heather, we got to work on the analytics of a reverse raise. It doesn't sound like it's a good proposition for you, but we'll have to figure that one out.
It really doesn't. It sounds horrible. And you know what? Now I realize why he didn't talk about this before. We talked for like an hour before, and he was just like, "We're going to talk about something." And now I know why we didn't really.
Yeah, it put you on the spot. You didn't come prepared for that. Well, yeah, I got it. But thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Listen. She's doing something a month ago. Now she's running customer service. Now she's running customer relations. Now she's putting buttons and producing the show. Now she's co-hosting the show. A reverse raise is in order. That's what I'm thinking. Let's go to work. Let's go to work. So crazy stuff, man. So this guy right here, I mean, to listen to him, he has got something he throws out on Twitter that I know me and Rick read religiously. So he throws out 15 minutes of Dynasty questions, go. So I would put that out and I'd get a big donut. This guy gets 25 questions in 10 minutes and then abruptly cuts off the last 5 guys and never get the answer in, which is my favorite because I wonder what those guys are thinking on everything. So Jordan, give me something. When you throw out on Twitter 15 minutes, go. Give me something, the craziest thing somebody asks you, something just goofy.
It's always funny because people ask me stuff that I haven't, and I'll usually say like this time of year, I don't feel comfortable talking about rookies yet.
Right.
So I'll usually say that. So people get some in-depth ones. People, for some reason, will ask me about like Chinese dynasties, which is always funny. I think there's a group of people that sort of do this thing, which is the best Chinese dynasty, which is pretty funny. So those are probably the best ones. But it's always funny. I'll shoot out the thing, and it's like if you could sort of video stream me doing it, it's typically me, feeding the baby or me driving around in my car trying to get the baby to fall asleep, and then I park and let's do 15 minutes of Dynasty questions. It's pretty fun. So that's usually what it corresponds to.
It's funny because I always envision you pulling up at a traffic light, answering a question, going to the next light and banging out another answer there.
Yeah, it's usually me parked in a parking lot someplace. It's typically how that thing goes.
I love it. So we're going to get into this book real soon, but I got a question for you. Me and you talked on the phone, and you were telling me about a book where there some kind of system 10-10-10, which you're going to let me know about it, and you've turned it into a dynasty strategy of 2-2-2. I know Rick has all the tech questions for you, but personally, I'm asking you this thing. Can you explain this to us a little bit, please?
Yeah, so it came from a book by a woman by the name of Susie Welch, and she wrote basically that you should think about your decisions in 10-10-10, right? 10-10-10 increments, 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years, and sort of go to that place, right? What future Jordan, right? Thinking about, if I were to look back 10 years on this decision, what would I say? 10 minutes or 10 months, right? And that's just basically a short, medium, and long-term decision-making, right? And it doesn't have to be 10 months exactly, but sort of putting a number on it makes you sort of concretely think about it. And so I thought it was really interesting. And so, I think a lot of that is missed in Dynasty, right? You'll see, it's always funny because people will say, they'll have segments like, was I drunk or not when I made this trade? Like, you're not thinking in the right windows when you're doing those things, right? And there's a lot of strategy and efficiency you're losing when you're making when you don't really have a strategic aim in mind. So I think a lot about the decisions that we make, you can think about them in those short, medium, and long-term windows. And I put 2 on it, right? I think other people would suggest maybe longer on the long end of that, but there's so much we can't control or can't really predict outside of a couple of years. So I really put the 2 as the long-term. With the thought process that, hey, it can be, there's upside that it's longer than that, but really 2 is kind of the long-term thinking. And then, I do think the short-term thinking is important too, because, I made a trade today and, what's the trade that I make today? Okay. That puts me overweight, right? So that puts me overweight at running back. So am I going to sort of divest from that, or am I going to sort of just keep carrying that weight through, right? And that's a strategic decision I have to make. As I'm making that trade-off or as I'm making that decision to accept those trades, what's the follow-on implications of it, right? And so people, I think, sometimes miss that, right? They say, well, I have a lot of depth at running back. I don't need to make this trade. Well, if I'm getting a good value on a running back, that means I can maybe, in this trade, that means maybe I can spin it off and do another trade or I'm just carrying more roster value now anyways, right? So I think thinking about those things in terms of each decision that you make, in terms of what window it's sort of aimed at is really helpful in terms of making a successful dynasty strategy.
That's outstanding. Heather, have you ever made a drunk fantasy trade that you regret?
I did.
It's a yes or no question. I'll give you a yes or no question.
Only yes or no. Only yes or no's. So no. The answer would be no, I have not.
Now,
But I bet you have.
Vision, Jordan. That's why she's a quality player. So, my friend, what's this? Your third book?
Yeah, this is number 3. So I did one in 2019, 2020, and this is 2021. So it didn't start off as being an annual thing. It was just going to be an evergreen sort of one-off. But I sort of like the process, and I've written 2 more since then. So it's become like a late January tradition in the McNamara household to be frantically putting together the book at the last minute. So yeah.
It's insane. Go ahead, Rick.
Do you have like an analytic background? Are you in finance or something, or what's your just a hobby?
No, I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but I spent an excessive amount of my college time building baseball models in my dorm room and not having a lot of friends. So that's kind of where this all comes from. So I did a lot of research and stuff in baseball, and I'm kind of, self-taught on some of the math stuff. And so it just became, baseball at that time was really interesting in terms of the analytics front. And then I became a lot more into football and started playing Dynasty. And then I was like, there's a lot here that you can put data to. It has just become kind of a search for efficiencies that aren't being exploited or inefficiencies that we can exploit. And so that's a lot of what it is when you're willing to look at things a little bit differently. There's a lot there, I think, that you can really get an edge in.
Right. So did you play Dynasty football before you started doing the books and the research?
Yeah, I've been playing Dynasty since 2016 2012, I should say. Excuse me, 2012. It's like any Dynasty player story, right? I played in 1 league, then 2 leagues, then 20, and that transition didn't take long. And then I started writing in 2016 and recording podcasts at uthdynasty.com with my buddy Chad Parsons. And then I sort of kind of took off from there. Now I'm a staff writer at Football Guys, and I've been doing the analytics of Dynasty thing for the past 3 years. And that's sort of how it transitioned. But I was a player first, and I still play a ton. And I like drafting, and I like trading and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, the writing stuff, it's a lot of fun too. It adds another layer of it too. It definitely it forces accountability in some spots.
So Rick,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Rick.
Have you noticed your winning percentages go up since you started digging into this? Are you applying it and having more success?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the winning percentage thing is always interesting because there's so much variance that goes into it, right? Like a couple of years ago, there was it would have been 2019. My ROI was absurd, and it was primarily based on a Sunday. I think it was a Sunday night performance between Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin. It just had an extreme impact on my ROI. And so it's funny because it'll move year to year. But one thing I track, I don't track the end all be all as being ROI. I track it as being win percentage, right? And then I sort of tier up my teams in terms of, each year I'll take on some more startup teams that I don't necessarily have a year one expectation for them. So I tend to look at my existing teams versus my startup teams or some of my orphan rebuilds or orphan adopts or whatnot. And so it's interesting. Like I have seen differences, and I've actually changed a lot of what I've done in terms of team building from writing it, right? So just the research that I found, I've completely flipped from being like wide receiver, a ton of wide receivers on my roster, to very few wide receivers on my roster and having a ton of running backs.
Okay.
So, and you're going to get into this with him, but I almost want Heather to move the squares where I'm down low and you're higher, because I can feel the man crush as soon as with all his data, with 2 data guys talking together. Being this close in my Brady Bunch square thing here in my house. That's rough. Listen, we're gonna
Hollywood Squares.
Hollywood Squares is correct. So this is Man Crush Squares. This guy, right? We want to promote this guy's book because it's an amazing piece that he's written. Heather, throw up there what Jordan, tell us about where they can get this book. We're going to tell them a couple times tonight, just to make sure they know where they can get this as we get moving.
Yeah, you can go to analyticsofdynasty.com.
And you can go to analyticsdynasty.com/shop to find the book specifically. The 2021 edition is $5 off if you use the promo code Depot. And so you can go ahead and get that. I actually have a bundle off the combining the 2020 and the 2021 editions together, and doing them because a lot of what I write is evergreen, right? So it's stuff that's not specific to a specific year, but it's a strategy, and it kind of builds and evolves on itself. So the 2020 edition is, I think, very important to understanding the 2021 edition. And I sort of cover some of it, but I don't want to make it a textbook where I'm just re-updating stuff. So it's a lot different, but I think they work really well together. And so, yeah, you can find all that at analyticsdynasty.com/shop.
And we're going to keep talking about that tonight. We're going to have Rick, who just finished the book, fire a couple questions about the book. Jordan and I put out a little thing on Twitter today. We're going to answer some of the group's questions today. We're going to be giving out a 30-minute strategy session with Jordan, including one of his books also. Can you imagine getting this guy coming in and helping you do a 30-minute session before you draft? It doesn't get any better than that. I wrote a question, maybe I'll win because I probably need it more than most. So I'm going to flip this over to Rick, right? And Heather, unless you don't want to fire the questions, we'll let Rick go with this. Yeah, it's a yes or no. You told me yes or no question.
I mean, I have a few. Yes. Go ahead, Rick.
Rick, go ahead. Let's talk about his book, his philosophy, what you read in there, some things that our listeners, all four of our listeners, are definitely going to want to know about tonight. And then we'll get into some questions from Jordan's Twitter feed today. But fire away, Rick.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, it's a great read. I'm actually didn't finish the whole thing yet. You read a chapter and then you go back and read it again. You start thinking about how you apply it to your own teams and that. And towards the beginning of the book, you were talking about the idea of adding strength to strength on a roster. And I thought about some teams where I have a couple quarterbacks good in a super flex, and maybe I have a top 1 or 2 pick, and where I wanted to go running back because I have a hole in my roster. But you got me to thinking, well, maybe, just stacking up on that position of strength gives me a lot more options going forward. So what have you seen in your research, and what's your advice for the listeners on that topic?
Yeah, I would. The example that I used was the Steelers. And for basically, I think it was from 2013 through 2020, I think they drafted 8 wide receivers on day 2 or in round 4. So in basically rounds 2 through 4. And what you saw was, right, they were a very good offense when that started, and they maintained. And that was through Antonio Brown's fiasco, right? The Martavis Bryant saga, right? Through all of that. And they basically they were able to extract value through that whole process, right? They got back multiple day 2 picks from the trades of those 2 guys when they were otherwise beaten down or sort of needed to go. And that was just because they built on a strength, right? They're going to reinforce the strength. With Dynasty, it's really easy to do that. One of the biggest mistakes folks make is I need to, I have a need at wide receiver. Who would you suggest at 103? That's the absolute worst thing that you can do. You just drafting a wide receiver in a rookie draft to help you in year 1 is really low odds, right? It's about maybe a 1 in 5, 1 in 6 shot of them truly moving the needle for you. And especially if it's a first round guy. And so how would I be better served to do that? Well, if I can go at a different position, right? And again, if I'm strong at running back and there's a running back there that I kind of have on par with a wide receiver, if I take the running back, all things being equal, I'll have a lot more opportunities to trade from strength, right? To get a wide receiver that I like that can help me. Right. So that might be, you might take your third running back and trade him for a wide receiver, or you can, when you're adding to a strength, you have a whole range of outcomes. Right. So we have teams where we're really good at a position, and that gives you a whole menu of options to trade for. Right. Because you have a lot of different players at a lot of different price points to address specific trade specific trade targets, right? So it's very marketable. So that would be one of the things that I would say is never you should never draft for need, right? Always draft what you think is the best, what you think is the best player, the best odds of hitting or whatever. And just absolutely avoid need. Figure out a way to address it otherwise, whether that's through trade, whether that's through, waivers or whatever, right? Think about addressing it that way. Never do it on the clock.
Okay. I think even when we're evaluating else, you and I, when we're looking at teams on Dynasty Depot, some of the teams that are stacked at receiver, thinking about, hey, who could I move on this to get another running back? It doesn't need to be a perfectly rounded team. Another interesting thing, I made some notes here, was you talked about the whole idea of players that are consistent versus, big game guys. And, Nelson and I talk about different formats, and we'll say, hey, he's a good best ball guy because he'll put up, big numbers, but then he'll have low games. And it sounds like from reading your chapter on that it's really all about scoring points, and you don't really focus on that too much. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a few dynasty narratives that are pretty bad. That's one of them. That consistency is important. And what you'll see is, for a lot of reasons, it's not true. But number one is that high variance teams don't perform any better or any worse than low variance teams, right? So what I mean by that is if you have a wide range of what you score your points in a week over the course of a season, right? Your weekly output, that doesn't hurt you, right? It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt your record. There's no relationship between the variance, or what I've measured, the standard deviation of a team's score over the course of a season with their record. It's totally random. Okay, so chasing that, and again, so if you're looking at one player on a 10-player or an 8-player or 9-player starting lineup, right? If that one player is up in a week or down in a week, right, you've got 8 or 9 other guys that are also playing, and they could be, they're largely independent of each other. So that, right, that it has a very low impact. So people are chasing, they're chasing something that absolutely doesn't matter. And that's great, because if you're willing to take the opposite side of that, it leaves players undervalued. And one other thing that's really important to consider in that, especially this is a specific wide receiver topic, I think is really where you get this. Right. Is you'll see players like Mike Evans or Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, inexplicably for like the longest time was, they're high variance, they're not valuable.
First guy that popped in my head when it comes.
Yeah, and Will Fuller, right, and he's a little bit different too because he was missing time, right, and so even if when you miss time, right, you're still you can replace that, right, so there is a replacement value to that. But if you get like a guy like Mike Evans who scores 7 or 8 weeks in the top 24 of the position for the season, 7 or 8 of his 16 weeks are in the top 24, right? He's going to finish really high. One thing I looked at was really surprising. The rate of guys that if you have 8 top 24 seasonal weeks, or 8 top 24 scoring weeks throughout the course of a 16-week season, sort of where does that rank you, right? And the rate that is in the top 24 at the position is like 98%. And which is incredible when you think about it, because that it doesn't seem like that high of a threshold. It doesn't seem like that. Half your weeks are wide receiver 2 weeks or better. The other half aren't. But it's crazy. And when you look at it, like in the past, when you look at that stat, it's been since 2015 that someone has posted that accomplishment and not been in the top 24 at the position, and it's almost always injury related. And I think all but one of them were like in the top 28, right? So it's really, really close, and the drop off isn't that much there.
It doesn't make sense, right? What you're saying, I'm sure you're right, but it's an incredible stat. It really is,
right. And that's just all perception, right? Like right. And wide receiver is high variance, and a lot of that is just touchdowns, right? If you score a touchdown in a week, there's a really good shot you're a top 24 guy. If you don't, it's hard to do. And if you score 8 of them in a season, right? kind of puts you in that that's rough math, right? But that's kind of what the idea is. And so when you sort of meld that over the course of the season, right, that's what matters. So I think an underrated thing, it sounds incredible to say, but an underrated strategy is just focus on guys that score more points, right? We get so cute looking at, oh, this player's boom bust, right? Just to ignore that noise. And it's not predictive year over year is even the worst part. So you have, oh, this guy was very boom bust last year. Like, just totally reject that. And it'll leave you because it affects the player cost, right? Like Mike Evans fell in price because he was boom bust. Amari Cooper falls in price because he's boom bust. Like, okay, like that's a buying opportunity. Like, I'll gladly pounce on that.
Yeah, I wonder go ahead, Nuff.
Go ahead. When you're done, go ahead and give him one more.
I was going to say, I wonder if that factors into people's rankings on the Dynasty. So not only, that's what a lot of people look at when they're forming their draft strategy. So if people making the rankings have that same opinion, that's where you get your value from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, I talked about this in the book too, is like rankings, or you have to be really careful about those things. And I write my books because I want them to be, I want people to sort of have strategic decision-making guidelines, right? Or help you make strategic decisions. So that way you're not just following what someone else says to do. You can sort of make your own decisions. And we see trade calculators, we see rankings, and a lot of times I don't think that what they're ranking for is what people are actually trying to consume them for. Right. A lot of times the rankings are ranking for something other than production. Right. And so you got to be really careful about those things, because if you don't know what someone's valuing, that a lot of times they're valuing the wrong thing. I saw this incredible poll that was like, hey, what's the best part about playing in Dynasty? And the answer was like, there was 4 questions, and like 38% of people said winning, and 5% of people said trading. Which is incredible when you think about that people are valuing, basically the means over the ends, right? Which is just, which is to me is just, so you're playing for right? That's a totally different mindset, and that's very exploitable if you sort of are willing to take a different angle on it.
That's true. Good stuff. Nelson, you want to move to the next thing, or you want me to keep firing away?
Go ahead, fire another one out.
All right. Another thing that caught me, we just came off the playoff season, right? And, some of your teams you're trying to make a run for end of the season, looking for that one trade to get you over the top. And the number of points it takes to gain a win in a league was crazy to me. It was like 9 points a game. If you make the trade with 4 weeks remaining, you need a big trade to push you over the top. And a lot of times you pay a penalty on your future success. You trade a young player for an established player, and based on the reading, it might not be worth it.
Yeah, this is probably the best thing that in terms of like trading and team building, that I ever came up with was this concept, which is warp. It's wins over replacement player, and that basically allows you to it helps you make any decision, because you can put anything in terms of warp, and that's trades, startup draft picks, all of it. And basically, the concept is in a start 1 quarterback league, it's a little bit different with Superflex, but in a start 1 quarterback league, there's basically 2 rules to think about. It's the rule of 7, which is that for every 7 points over the course of a season that you increase your average weekly score. Right. So if you bump your team from being 130 points to 137 points over the course of a season, it's a little bit more than that, but that's, 7's the easiest way to think about it. It's like 7.4 or something like that. But every 7 points you increase your average score, you expect an added win. And the total number of points that you need to add to increase a win is 97. Right. So if you make a trade in week 3, right, you have less weeks to have that, to have that 97. So the number jumps from 7 to 8 or 9 or something like that. Right. So if you're halfway through the season, right, to get a win added over the course of the rest of the season, you need, something like 13 or 14 points of an advantage, which is really tough to do. And so that's one of the things, and especially when you have guys that are, like very close performing, it's a great sell opportunity. You know, for example, like I traded Joe Mixon today, and I have like he's a guy that fits, like there's 3 or 4 guys that I have on my roster that roughly are pretty close to him in terms of what I might expect them to score. Mm-hmm. And if I can get a big premium off of that, right, that's gaining a lot, because I'm not losing very much in terms of my win expectation, but I'm gaining a lot in terms of other things. It's very helpful. So that's really the way that I incorporate it, and thinking about trades and thinking about team building and thinking about, you know, if your team was 5-8 last year, how much better does it need to be 8-5, right? Well, you need 3 wins, and that's 21 points per game, right? In Superflex, the number that I found is actually 8. It's 8. It's 104 points for the season, or 8 points on average over a 13-week regular season.
That's very good. So Nels, we won't be making any of those rookies for D-Hop last 2 weeks of the season anymore.
Yeah. That's all. So let's move on. We're going to move on to your Twitter fans out there that are probably anxiously awaiting some of these responses. I've selected a few questions out. We're going to see if we can rip through, what do we call this, Heather? 10 minutes? What is it? 10 minutes of Dynasty questions. Go. Should we go?
Go.
From Anthony Browner, Jordan. In a Superflex startup, how do you decide between a veteran like Dak or Russ to anchor your squad versus an option like Herbert and Burrow? In theory, you get more years from the younger guys, but
that's the theory. The problem is the hit rate's really low. So again, I think about drafting quarterbacks in startups, and I think about this to receivers, especially really expensive ones too. It's a lot like dating somebody, right? If you don't marry someone on the first date, I guess you can, but the risk of that's pretty high. I like to get to know them a little bit, right? And so, you know, you date, and then you meet their family, right? You find out what they like to do, right? You do a lot of things, and then you figure out, hey, are we good? Are we a good match? Same thing with quarterbacks, right? Like you can't, Lawrence is going to be a big test of this because people are anointing him. I've talked to people who have him at quarterback 3. That is a bridge way too far for me. And when you look at the guys that hit in the top 10 of the NFL draft, you'll just see that the hit rate's like 50-50. And the guys drafted earlier in the round in the top 10, right? The guys 1 and 2 and 3, they're statistically better than the guys drafted later in that quadrant, right? So again, there's a lot of risk there. We know with, and I actually looked for guys hit 2 or more seasons. If you just know about someone that they have, that they're a top 10 quarterback with no history of production, the odds that they produce a two top 12 seasonal finishes, right? So 2 quarterback 1 finishes is 50%. For guys that we know that they've produced at least 2, it's actually like 55%. And that's not a great number because you don't know, like a lot of those guys might've been later on in their career that they actually did it. Right. So, where the like Dak Prescott, we sort of know that happened early, right? With, Russell Wilson, we know that kind of happened early. So if you sort of got in on that when they were 25, right, you sort of have a long runway to get in on that. So, so for me, if you haven't done it, and I lay out a couple of different ways in the book to think about this in terms of production, but you would much rather wait a year for them to prove it and then buy at the price than to buy early with the hope that they're going to be the next big thing, because it's highly unlikely. And even like the NFL, like the Dak press, like the Dallas Cowboys got this totally right. Like they waited another year on Dak just to see, like just to make sure. And like Dak proved that he was right before he got hurt. But you look at all the long
Philly.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like look at the guys. So I actually went and looked at this, in the past 10 classes, when you go back to not including this year, but the prior years, basically back since 2010. So 2010 to 2018 was what I looked at. There was like 30 quarterbacks drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. 9 of them were either going to projected to be long-term extensions, like that $100 million extension, or had gotten signed to it. 2 of them are currently playing right now on a rookie deal. So that's Allen and Lamar Jackson. So right, of the other 7, Goff and Wentz are 2 of them, and their teams are already trying to move off of them before their extension even kicked in. Right. So again, buying too early at quarterback is disastrous, especially early in a startup draft. So that would be my caution in terms of when you look at all those things. Like, you much rather spend a couple of years getting to know someone and then take Dak at 27 than to get burned by someone in their early 20s that totally flames out.
So it's like love versus lust. You need to.
Yeah. Like Trevor Lawrence is like the pretty girl in the bar, right? Like everyone wants to go up and talk to her and roster, and get him on their team. Whereas like,
right.
The marriage material is like sitting right there that everyone's ignoring. Right. And that's exactly what it is. And it's consistent in Dynasty. Same thing with wide receivers.
What do you think, Heather? Like when they clip this show for our TikToks and everything, do you think the quote "love versus lust" might be in that 60-second clip?
That might be it right there.
Right.
That's going to be a chapter in Analytics of Dynasty 2022. So,
question from Shani B. Jordan: should we be strategically selling rookie picks we deem worthy of a draft slot that's already hit? I have seen Michael Thomas sold for 1.0, for example.
Yeah, that's so it's a complicated question. The short answer is you take Michael Thomas. But that's not the answer in every scenario. So I actually have in the book, I have a chart that tells you basically what the equivalence is between startup picks and rookie draft picks. So you can know that, like, for example, like the 101 is historically pick 20. Right, that's essentially where it falls, which is what you would expect with it, right? So you can sort of compare those versus the players that are there. So that would be the way that I would think about it as an initial thing. I tend to think that picks are undervalued just because we think about them wrong. And that's not to say that you can't get values in trading for veterans. Typically, I think you can. But I think that just systematically, I think people think about rookie picks in the wrong way. But yeah, I would take Thomas in that situation.
Like Brandon Schulmeister chiming in: how do you balance a contrarian strategy in a startup when rookies are overvalued while keeping a long-term view on your roster? Going truly contrarian, you may diverge and lean toward older proven players in this scenario. Your thoughts, he would like.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I actually did some analysis because I was fascinated by this question, because everyone wants to trade down, accumulate future draft picks and try and build for the long term. And I wanted to know if like that was successful, right? And so one of the things that I did was look at how teams that actually trade future draft picks do versus teams that trade for them, right? So the guys that compare the teams that trade them away to the teams that trade for them versus the teams that don't do anything, right? And we can sort of have an idea of how those pan out. And what you'll consistently see is the elite upside teams come from the guys that trade players away. Now, that's not necessarily to say that that's the optimal strategy, because what you see there is a lot of miss too, right? Like you see a lot of miss there. Right. But you do see consistently that the guys that get that strategy right are very high upside. The problem is it's hard to do, right? So you're really threading a needle. So for me, I mean, if everyone's sort of, and I would use the trade chart, right? I would use the equivalency chart that I have in the book, comparing, players to picks and getting an understanding of where they're going and to see if they're undervalued or not. And I tend to think, now is a particularly dangerous time to draft rookie wide receivers, because we don't know the pedigree, and the most significant thing about a rookie prospect is their draft pedigree. right? And if you don't know, and in the book I have this as well, I actually looked at February ADP and tried to figure out, hey, what does February ADP tell us for wide receivers? Well, half of those guys by the end of the year aren't in the first round, right? Half of the wide receivers that were in the first round of ADP in February didn't make that by the end of the season, and then when you look at running back, it's 100%. So again, the types of bets that you make are really, really important. So that would just be my overall thought.
We talked, maybe a little spin off on that. Come from me. I know we talked, I believe, on a previous show. Somewhere the conversation was the 101 last year, and you were staying far away from Allaire, and you would have moved down and grabbed, 1-8, 112, and 2-7, something like that, to take different shots at receivers there, which obviously would have panned out pretty well if you hit on some of those guys, Higgins, Jefferson, whatever. You still believe in that? You're moving that top pick?
I think it matters the cost, and it matters the class, right? So I think last year, and I'll probably write about this at some point. The more I did write about this. The more that I sort of look back at last year, the mistake that I made was there was a lot of sameness, and that was, you could just aggregate a ton of it if you did it right, which was to trade from 101 to 105, collect the spread on that, which was probably a first plus, and take a running back that had almost the exact same profile, right? Or trade from the Judy pick to the end of the first round to take Jefferson or Rager or whatever, right? Like trading that spread. Those were all essentially the same profiles. And when you sort of look at them, right, that's what you're trying to aggregate. And because there's so much we don't control, that's really the best thing that you can do. So yeah, I think that a lot in terms of looking at that. I think this year might be a little bit different in terms of some of the quarterback stuff about how we execute that. If there's going to be 7 wide receivers in the first round of rookie drafts, trading down is just banging away because the hit rate on the elite guys isn't even that high, right? So you take 2 shots on that same profile, right? That's a lot better than taking 1, right? So, so that would be sort of my general strategy, is try to figure out how to, it's arbitrage. Try to figure out how to get, something, one asset for that's the same as another asset for a lot cheaper, right? And that's a lot of, I think, the way that we should be thinking about rookie drafts, and I don't think a lot of people do it.
I like it. I'm going to give you one more here. From two-step 02, what are the profile characteristics you look for in a second and third round draft pick? After draft capital, what else are your key indicators for a hit rate?
Well, the draft capital and the positions are different, right? So the draft capital impact is different by position, right? And the cost will be different too. So you'll see, like if, for example, if a second round tight end makes it to round 3 of a rookie draft, you take them, right? And that's a hard rule, right? If a day 2 running back makes it to round 3, you take them, right? And you just do that, right? That's historically, that's a great strategy. So like Cole Clement last year, just banging on him in this third round. He's like my most owned tight end, just because the cost of what I got him was incredible, just based on his pedigree and his profile. So that's really the thing that I would do. If you're trying to sort out positions, I have a whole chapter that I actually had a contributor write, and I'd said for so long, I wish that there was a single reference resource that you could go to and say, all right, like, what are the things that I should look at for, when I'm looking at rookies? What are the stats I should look at? Because there's so much, it gets so complicated. You follow on Twitter, everyone's pointing to different stats, what actually matters, right? So I was like, well, this is a perfect thing for the analytics of Dynasty. So I had a contributor, Peter Howard, of the Dynasty Crossroad podcast, and he came in and wrote it. It was fantastic, and gives you all the different things for all different positions to sort of look at. And I guess the easiest thing at wide receiver would be like dominator rating. So that's your average market share of how much of the receiving offense, the receiving yards in your offense you got when you're in college, and you average that against the market share of your touchdowns, right? So if you had 1,000 yards and of receiving yards and your team threw for 4,000, right? That's 25%. If you scored 10 touchdowns and they threw for 30, that's 33%. You average them together, and that's what your dominator rating is. So when you sort of look at that for wide receivers, and you sort it by age in particular, right? So that at a 27, 28, 29% dominator rating at 18 years old is a lot better than it at 22 years old, right? Because if you're younger prospects that perform better are good than guys that break out later historically. So those would be the things that I would start with. And then, I think you can get more specific as you look into, we could do a whole hour and a half on rookie metrics. But yeah, I would go
the hour and a half rookie metrics show.
Put people to sleep. But yeah, I mean, that's where I think you go and find in the analytics of Dynasty the things that you look at by different positions and really go from there.
So let's say your 15 minutes is cut off. The last guys we're not reading because that's what Jordan does on Twitter. You're not getting it. But
I'm not that extreme about it. Yeah, I'm a softie.
Pull in the driveway and sit in the car and answer one more question. Here we go.
No, then the baby will wake up.
Right.
Yeah.
It's okay. Somebody
if
else.
If it'll keep the baby asleep, I'll stay in there for another hour.
There you go. For the love of the baby.
Yes.
Dynasty Pythians in a Dynasty startup. Is it crazy to take only rookies if you can draft them, then trade them away after they have reached max value to balance out your team? It's a lot in one sentence, Jordan.
I get the idea. It's really tough to predict future market value is I think the easiest thing to say. And I actually have it in the book. This was something that fascinated me because people have pitched this to me before. And I said, well, let's actually look at it. And it's historically not as profitable as you would think it would be. So that would be the caution that I would have to that. Can it work? Sure. Any strategy could work. Generally speaking, drafting rookie wide receivers in startup drafts is at the cost that you're getting them is a bad bet compared to the guys that are. So let me take a step back. If you compare wide receivers, for example, at a given cost, right? And a guy who has not hit yet in his NFL career. So if it's a 4th round startup pick and you're comparing him against a 4th round startup pick who has hit, and that's all you know about the players, you're taking a bath by taking the guy that hasn't hit yet, right? Historically, in terms of hit rate, it's going to cost you like a half a win over the next 3 seasons. Like it's a big loss, right? You're a lot less likely. To give you an idea, to draft a wide receiver at in the 4th round who hasn't hit yet, so an incoming rookie or maybe a second-year guy or something like that who hasn't hit for a top 24 seasonal finish, he has the same expected future outcome as a veteran drafted in the 8th round. Okay, so that is a huge difference. So if you're going to pay up for that, like you have a lot of risk. You have a lot of risk in doing that. What's the trade? What's the difference in that value? That's probably a 1st round rookie pick, right? Between the 4th and the 8th round. So that would be something that I'd really caution people against doing because it's historically, yes, it can work. But I think we look back and we say, oh, look, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, and Chase Claypool did it. Be like, well, yeah, but the guys that you actually paid up for in terms of Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Reagor didn't, right? And you're taking a bath there now. And the hit rate on that's like 50% at best, right? In terms of them improving valuation. So I'd be very cautious about that. I think you can do it at running back, right? If you wanted to say, hey, I'm going to go all in and sort of press my chips in on being all in at rookie running backs. I probably wouldn't solely do that, but I don't think it's much better than doing it at wide receiver. And I wouldn't do it at quarterback at all.
I think last year's draft had some people too on that one. Like there were so many hits in this last class. And people now think it's going to be like that every year.
Yeah, and it's you should totally zig when everyone's going to zag, right? It's going to drag the market. All the recency from that market's going to drag it this year, and it's just going to make veterans. And we've already seen it. Right? The tried and true guys are going to be, Mike Evans is going to end up going into the Hall of Fame, and people are going to be drafting him in like the 8th round of startup picks because he's not, the new girl at the bar, right?
The one guy that I popped back to every time, who I got in the 6th, 7th round a ton last year, Keenan Allen.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
What?
Yes.
Hello, right? I mean,
Yes.
now he's back into the 3rd round now this year, but they have a quarterback, there's nothing there. Nobody knew Herbert was going to do this, but the player is such a quality player, and he's so good at football. 7th round, he won a lot of people money this year.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a very again, like if you're taking those guys in the 8th round, that's the same as taking a guy who hasn't hit in the 4th, right? I mean, that is just, when you think about that, there's a total, and one of the things I found that's just really exploitable is that there's what the market's miscalibrated, right? Because they're trying to get multiple like elite hits at the expense of winning. Right. They're drafting for, and people do this all the time. They draft for sex appeal instead of like functionality in terms of like actual production and actual winning. Like it happens all the time. And this is where it shows up in terms of wide receivers. People ask me, who's the most undervalued player that you would try and go out and get? And I was like, guys in their mid 20s with multiple top 24 seasonal finishes at wide receiver. Like as a class, that's it.
Yeah. Like a Jarvis Landry in the 9th round last year.
Yeah. Who, by the way, had a really good season just on down volume. Like people are like, oh, he's
coming off injury. He still had a good season.
Yeah. His efficiency metrics were like amongst the best in his career. They just didn't throw it to him that much. Right. But it was just low passing volume. Not even like, again, he was totally in line with market share and all of those like advanced stuff. Like they just ran the ball a lot. That's the simple explanation for Jarvis Landry's stat line.
It is fascinating to me that you have so much knowledge. Like all of you guys with these, it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
Well, and the funny thing is like analytics can be super complicated, and some people make it that. I try and do the exact opposite, which is I think analytics should be like, I think the easiest, because I try and write my analytics things not to be super dense, but to be simple, right? To give you simple rules, right? And if at some point I'll do a chapter that's like, hey, 10 simple rules from like the Dynasty Analytics of Dynasty trilogy or whatever. And just like, hey, here are
like Dynasty for Dummies.
Well, that's kind of what I try and be, right? Like I actually think you can do, you should get a copy. And I try and have it so that it caters to everyone, right? But there's like simple rules that you can follow, and then you can get more complicated, right? But there's simple rules that you can follow that again, sometimes it's just avoiding the bad bets, right? Like you just don't step on 20% landmines, 20% hit rates when you should be drafting 60% guys, right? Like just don't do that and you're better off. That's kind of what it is. And then again, I think my book catered to anyone. I think you can, it caters to the 100 levels dynasty player or the 400 level dynasty player. It's just different ways which you implement it, and different people take different things from it.
Mm-hmm. Heather, Rick.
Yes.
Give me the question you liked the best tonight.
I might have to hear him again.
Heather, go ahead and
Rick, I got him.
repeat it to Rick and see if you like it. Give me one.
I mean, I liked the first. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I liked the first one because we talked about the guys in the bar with who they're going to marry. I like that one. So we're going with Anthony Browner.
Rick, Anthony Browner was in a Superflex startup. How do you decide between veterans like Dak and Russ and Herbert and Burrow? You like that question? I thought it was a good question also. Yeah. I did. So what we're going to do for Mr. Browner is he's going to DM Mr. McNamara, and paid by Dynasty Depot, we're going to be giving him a free 30-minute strategy session with this young man right here. So you DM Jordan that it's you, Mr. Browner, and we'll take care of the tab for you. I'm going to pick the book. I kind of like two-step 02 with the profile and the characteristics of a second and third round pick. What are you looking for there? And the draft capital. After the draft capital, what are the key indicators on the hit rate? What do you think about that, Rick?
Yeah, I agree. That was a good question. Actually, and some very good metrics behind it on the answer side too.
I like it. So two-step 02, please DM Mr. McNamara, and he will be providing you a free copy of the analytics of Dynasty 2021. Again, courtesy of Dynasty Depot. We thank you guys for your questions. It was awesome. We are going to move on right here. This is what I've really been looking forward to this week. We're going to pop up the Dynasty Depot Team of the Week. Now, this team is for sale currently on Dynasty Depot. Has around a $2,000 price tag on it, somewhere around $2,000. So we're looking at 4X, but we're not going to talk about the price on this team. I'd like Jordan, with Rick's help, to pick this apart a little bit for a minute or two. What pieces are you moving? What do you like value-wise here? What are you thinking about with these picks? Talk to me, Jordan.
Yeah, so in a start one quarterback league, I think you got to kind of tighten up the quarterbacks would sort of be my initial play. So if I was looking at this, I mean, I think Burrow's going to have the highest trade value, and I don't think the difference between him and Cousins is all that much over the next couple of years. And in start one, that's kind of what you're worried about. So that would be my take. I would probably try and pivot off Burrow. I'm not sure anyone's going to trade for Drew Lock or Daniel Jones. I keep wishing that Andrew Luck would come back, and that name keeps bleeding into Drew Lock. So it's tough for me there. So that would sort of be my pivot off at quarterback. I really like the running backs in terms of you're building around Swift and Dobbins. I think Dobbins is an interesting pivot player. I think he could go up or down. Right. So you could trade Dobbins up and go, see what the spread is between him and whether that's like Taylor or someone like that. I think that's an interesting pivot. And I think you could go back, right? The difference between him and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a really interesting value that I'm going to explore, because I have a handful of shares of places where I roster Dobbins, and that's something I'm going to explore. Him down to Zeke, what's the spread there? Him to David Montgomery, what's the spread there? I don't think those guys are terribly different profiles, and I think the prices are pretty widely different. So that would sort of be my take on that, right? And I like Swift a lot. And then at wide receiver, my suggestion would be tighten it up. And again, you're only going to start 3-4 wide receivers. There's no reason to roster, 8 or 9, especially in a FFPC where you're going to be roster crunched as it is, right? You want the big bets that you make at the end of your roster, you want them to be one injury away running backs, right? You want them to be the shot at Mike Davis, the shot at this year's Giovanni Bernard, the shot at the guy that Jerry West, the guy that's on the Analytics of Dynasty logo, his point line from 2019, Latavius Murray, right? Those are the things that massively move weeks. Raheem Mostert, Damian Williams, right? Tim Hightower going back. Like, those are guys that won people money, right? Yep. You want your bets to be there. And historically, that has been over and over again. That's the biggest thing. The biggest mistake that people make in Dynasty is they roster too many wide receivers on the back end of your roster. This would be a place I would tighten up. Gabriel Davis would be one I'd probably try and move off of, especially if they cut John Brown. He's going to see a uptick in cost, and I'm not sure that he really warrants being a wide receiver too. That'll be an interesting one. Tim Patrick's maybe a guy you could sell, Slayton, but I would look to, and I think Reynolds could be cuttable, if he doesn't sign someplace pretty notable in free agency and those sorts of things. And I would try and trade. I think Goddard's really good. I would try and trade Hayden Hurst. So whether that's, using him in a package with Dobbins or getting pick equity or something like that. Let me
bounce back to you real quick here. Give me the profile. This is a guy that me and Rick roster a lot on a lot of our teams. Consistently start up 7th, 8th round pick for us. Tyler Boyd, somebody we have a lot of shares of. Rick, is that correct? I'm pretty sure. Yep. What's your thought on him? We like him. We'd like to know what you think about him.
Yeah, I mean, he fits exactly the profile of guy with multiple top 24 hits in his 20s that's disrespected, right? Like, that's kind of that's kind of him. I actually think when you look at that, it's actually guys that are more expensive is kind of the names that I was talking about, like Evans and Cooper and DJ Moore, and you could go down Brandon Cooks. I mean, you just go down the list. Michael Thomas probably qualifies at this point. I mean, everyone's just, we need the next big thing. Tyler Boyd's in there as well, right? So again, as a class, as a profile class, that's a really good one to sort of be in on.
We're on target again, Rick. It's what we do, right?
Yep.
Again. Profile, talk to me about Goddard. Being from Philly, I don't care who's throwing the ball. I like him. He's going to be the tight end one this year, obviously. Ertz will be moving on. What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, what a downfall. We talked about an hour and a half of rookie metrics. We could do a weekly 2-hour series for 3 years on the Eagles. I think Goddard's a pretty high level guy. I think that it might get capped in terms of the perception of him. I think ultimately any pass catcher you're really worried about is you're worried about the targets that they get, right? And skill is getting the targets. And then the targets, what you see is have a certain worth, right? So again, skill of getting open, right? Of getting on the field, right? All of those things are important. But once you sort of get targeted, it doesn't, that means something, and it has a certain, over the course of a large number, right? If you're getting 110 targets, it kind of doesn't really much matter who the quarterback is, right? I think we overstate that impact. So I think Goddard's the type of guy that, especially in that offense, without a true wide receiver one, I hope that Jalen Reagor is that, but without a true wide receiver one, Goddard's really interesting, especially when you consider that the running backs haven't really been super efficient either. I don't know if that was a Doug Peterson thing or if that was Carson Wentz thing or what.
Running backs coach, that was a too stale.
Yeah, that's something that I will never understand. I don't understand what happened to the 2020 Eagles. I can't figure it out. But yeah, that's certainly something that I think, like, if you looked at Goddard, of the guys that could lead his team in targets, lead his team in receptions, he's in a select few that I think you could actually point to and say that's a reasonable possibility in 2020, because there isn't that many, which makes him really valuable. So
stay in there. Another selfish question here, because Heather, right on. Do you know anybody more selfish than me? That was a yes or no. Right. So I'm again. I can just told you this off the air, but I'm going to do it anyway because people are listening and they're texting me and whatever. So, like week 14, not 14. Week 12, one of my teams that weren't doing well, I picked up Bryant and Arnold on as many teams as I could. Was I on target there? Am I maybe sitting on something? Was I smarter than everybody else, or you're not so high on either? Dan Arnold, I feel like there's something there, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are the types of bets that I'd much rather take those bets than speculative bets at wide receiver. Right. So, and again, one of the good things about those types of bets is their early reveals, right? You're not trying to sit on a long-term project, and you don't want to in FFPC, right? You want to know, hey, is Dan Arnold going to be the starter in Arizona? Because if he's not, I'm probably cutting him. But you're going to know that before you need to cut, probably, right? Same thing with Bryant, right? If they bring back Joku and they're going to run out Hooper and you're sitting there, you got the third tight end in the Cleveland Browns. Is that something you want to keep? Probably not. But if Joku gets moved, they trade Joku and somehow they were to cut Hooper, I'm just putting together a scenario.
They might get $44 million for a year, $44 million. They might.
Yeah. And I think the way that Hooper's contract is structured, that's not really that likely. If memory serves, that's not something I specifically looked at recently, but I think memory serves, that's right. So again, if those things change, right? I'd much rather take that bet than take, a developmental wide receiver who's at best going to be like a wide receiver 3, because that doesn't really help anybody, like especially when we're low.
Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up with that on when was Bryant drafted? And you had a table in your book about tight ends that are drafted in the first couple rounds, like their hit rate is crazy high. I don't remember where he was drafted though.
Yeah, Bryant was drafted. I believe it was around 4. I get him and Hunter Bryant confused. Yeah, I think he was drafted. He was drafted in the 4th round, if memory serves. Yeah, 4th round. He was 115 overall. So again, those guys. See, here's the interesting thing about the draft capital thing again, right? Is that each position is different, right? So 3rd and 4th round, it's like 3rd round wide receivers are like 4 times more likely to produce than 4th round wide receivers, right? It's a huge difference. At tight end, they're about the same, right? So again, understanding those differences is hugely valuable, especially when there's a big spread in cost.
So finishing this team up here, looking at the draft picks, got a lot of ammo there, Jordan. What are you thinking there?
I mean, if it was me, yeah, I think you're sitting at 102, 103, and 110. I think 102 is probably going to be a running back, would sort of be my initial thought. We'll see. I think if someone's willing to, to trade up to you at 103, and that's going to be wide receiver 1, I think you let them take that bet and you move down and collect additional assets, right? And that could be, it could go a number of different ways, right? You could trade that for Michael Thomas. You could trade that for, 108 and another piece that helps you, right? You can have a lot of ideas open. And the best part, again, sort of working off the dating analogy, now's the perfect time to sort of explore these things, right? Again, it's kind of like, it's kind of like flirting, right? Like, hey, I'm not really looking to make a trade right now, but hey, if you were interested in 103, like what would you be looking to move, right? And you can sort of have those discussions. And then that way, when you get closer to the pick, you sort of know, or do some research on it and say, hey, listen, here are some of the players that I think are up. Pay attention to your trade block, all those things, right? That would sort of be a pivot point for me with this team, is I would say 103 is probably going to be moving time, and figuring out a way to move off of that and collect more. So yeah, and probably doing, because I think you can do that and help your wide receiver situation, right? Like you can move down, help your wide receiver situation, and probably still get a 1st round wide receiver from moving down, right? I think that's a really interesting strategy with this particular team. And then, 2nd round, we talked about the later 2nd and 3rd round and 4th round rookie picks. If you never took a wide receiver outside of the 1st round of a rookie draft, I don't think that's necessarily a bad strategic decision. You could just avoid doing that historically and be fine. So that's taking a lot of running backs, taking a lot of tight ends. Quarterbacks in 3rd and 4th rounds have historically been really good bets. That would sort of be my look on that. And if you're not taking a 1st round wide receiver in the 2nd round of a rookie draft, you're most likely losing odds taking a wide receiver in rookie drafts based on who's also going in the round. So that would sort of be my general thought on this. And I think, figuring out a way to use these picks to get some more, higher end players, whether that's at running back and in a wide receiver, and sort of flipping the dynamics of your roster, right? Instead of rostering 3 running backs, roster and 3 running backs and 9 wide receivers, figure out a way to roster, flip it, or figure out a way to roster 2-to-1 running backs to wide receivers, right? Doing those things are just things that'll give you a lot more efficiency.
I like it. Thank you, buddy. So we're going to move on. What I would like to do now, I would like Jordan to once again, since he's provided us with unbelievable information, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing this stuff with us. Let's talk about where you can get this book again, Jordan.
Yeah, you can go to analyticsofdynasty.com/shop. You can get the 2021 edition. Like I said, a lot of the stuff we talked about too is hitting the 2020 edition, right? So they kind of bleed together, and I don't write them to be just an update on the last one. I sort of write them to be their own freestanding piece. But the more and more I write, the more and more they're interwoven into each other. So I cover a little bit of it, but I have a bundle in there. You can get them both together. I think that's really that's a huge advantage. And I also do over at analyticsdynasty.com. I also have a membership to the website. I do daily podcasts in the off season. So basically from now through the up until the course of the start of the season, I'm releasing a daily podcast talking about a variety of different things: players, profiles, strategies, tactics, rookie drafts, startup drafts, you name it. I'm sort of covering it over there. And that's a lot of fun. So you can go ahead and get a membership to that. You have all my Dynasty tiers, which is a different take on rankings, more in line with like the windows that we talked about, that 222 stuff. Very much thinking about players like that. It's just different than your linear rankings are. So all that stuff, you can all find it at analyticsdynasty.com. And you can find the book analyticsdynasty.com/shop.
That's awesome, Jordan. Thank you so much. I really hope, because I know Rick, we talked about, he kind of asked you questions about half of the stuff he wanted to ask you. Hopefully 4 or 5 weeks when we get a little closer to the draft, if you grace us with your presence again and we can finish asking questions and talk a little more details about some players coming out.
I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that. That'd be great.
So we are going to move on to our final segment tonight. I think we call this the Day of Reckoning from our great prognosticator, Mr. Borgata Brett. Welcome, Mr. Brett. How are you, sir?
I'm great.
Are you great, Brett? Are you great? Bankroll good? What happened yesterday? Good, bad? Good, buddy.
Well,
Hold on. It's never good to start out bragging about your picks with, yeah, you know.
Well, here's the deal. It wasn't a bad day.
Or here's the deal.
It was a profitable day. The one pick that I was on the fence the most about was the side of the game, and I picked the wrong side. There was a lot of conflicting trends there. But I went with Kansas City, and obviously, that was the wrong way to go.
It's okay.
But my basic premise, remember I said if there was one bet I was going to make, if you made me only make one bet, it would be under in the first quarter, under 10.5 points. And I gave you all the statistics
and
why.
I have to stop you there, Brett, because your greatness was probably picked up by the NBC crew yesterday, because you did see the one stat they put on the TV was Tom Brady's points in the first quarter in his 9 Super Bowls, correct?
Right.
You did see it. So I know they got that from you, yet they did not credit you.
No.
So I am now crediting you for what they didn't do yesterday.
I appreciate that, Nelson.
Sure.
That's kind of you. So that went under kind of easily because there was a late touchdown, by Tampa, and it really wasn't ever in jeopardy except for the kickoff where it looked like that guy might break the kickoff.
A little scary.
Yeah. So that was my best bet. That was a winner. Under in the game was a winner. Tyreek Hill under 94.5 yards was a pretty easy winner. No 2-point conversion attempt was a winner. I lost the under 10 penalties because the refs went nutty in the first half. We don't want to talk about the penalties in the game. It'll be talked about for a long time. And so between the side, I lost the penalties, and like a baby bet on the coin flip, which was just a fun thing. Right. So when I weighed them out, I said, 1 unit here, 3 units here, 4 units there. If your unit was $100, I would have had a $455 profit. So it was a bad day. I just want to get them all right, But
we expected you to get them all right. We expected you. Your man, you mispronounced Carl Sheffers, the referee's name, a few times on the show. So he decided to throw a few extra flags to put Brett in his place a little bit. Is that correct?
That was his first Super Bowl. It might be his last.
Tremendous. So moving on, man. The season's over. We got a lot of stuff for you coming in the off season. We're sending you out to pasture next week. We're giving you a week off. But the opening Super Bowl lines are out for 2022 Super Bowl 56. Now listen, I know me and you talk about this stuff. There's a lot of teams, a lot of quarterbacks are going to be moving around right now, okay? It's very hard to predict who's where and what. Any line come out early that you might want to take a peek at?
Okay, well, let me just say a couple things before that. Number one, if you're going to bet a team to win the Super Bowl, you really ought to bet them to win the conference as well, because it's so hard to pick the winner of the Super Bowl. But if you're picking a team that's 20-1, you're probably going to get 10-1 on them to win the conference. So you need to bet both of those. And also, it makes no sense to bet a team with short odds this far ahead of the start of the season, because so many things can happen. So Kansas City is plus 550. They're the favorite, right? If you bet them at the beginning of the playoffs, you're still going to get plus 250. So what are you giving up? And guys can get hurt. There's a million things that can happen. So you can't bet a team at short odds now. I can't understand that. What you can do now is you can look at some teams that have decent odds. So what I like to do is I like to look at the odds, and I just like to look at who the quarterback situation is. And I want to also look at where they are relative to the cap, because there's teams that are buried on the cap. There's teams that have a lot of room under the cap, and those, are going to either limit or give you a lot of opportunities to sign players. And we're just kind of getting into that whole thing, which will start in about a month. So if I look at the NFC is kind of easy because there's just not a lot of good teams in the NFC. Tampa Bay's 9-1. They're $30 million under the cap, and everybody's coming back, right? I mean, Brady's coming back. Gronk's coming back. They may not keep Shaq Barrett because, he's a free agent, I believe. But, so they may lose a couple people, but they got $30 million under the cap. They have things that they can do. So you have to look at Tampa Bay again. The other two teams in the NFC at bigger odds that I think are some value is Seattle at 22-1. Seattle is about $4 million under the cap, so they don't have a cap problem. And Dallas at 30-1. I hate to even say the word Dallas at 30-1, but the NFC East. The NFC East. I mean, they got to be the favorite to win the NFC East, right? So they're $18 million under the cap. I guess they get Dak Prescott for another year, right? But they have decent talent on that team, and I think the coach is lousy, but they're going to make the playoffs probably. I don't know who's going to beat them out in the division. If you look at the AFC, I have to lean towards Buffalo at 12-1. I like Baltimore at 12-1, and Baltimore is $20 million under the cap, and they draft really well. And I like the Chargers at 30-1. And they got rid of that coach who had to cost them a couple games.
Yep.
And they have some players on that team. And then as far as the quarterback's concerned, the biggest opportunity to buy cheap right now is probably Indianapolis. They're $69 million under the cap, which is probably why they could afford to take Carson Wentz. But they have tremendous cap room. They have a great offensive line, and they're not in the toughest division either. So Houston's a disaster. Tennessee, who knows? So the Colts could be the favorite in that division. Once you're in the playoffs, as we saw with Tampa Bay, you got a chance to win it.
What are their odds, Brett, on Indy?
Indy is 25-1. But they don't have a quarterback right now.
They will.
Basically don't have a quarterback right now.
All right.
A lot of money to spend now.
So that's it. That's what I got for you.
Well, hey, listen, we appreciate you coming on our shows and giving us great information. We're going to have you back on as soon as the team totals come out, the win team totals come out, which is right after the schedule. We'll start taking a peek at that. That should be a real interesting show. We're going to wrap this up. This has been an hour and 20 minutes. We thought it was like 40, but when Jordan comes on, we want to hear what we got. So, Jordan, give us your social plugs. Where can they find you? What do we need to do to find you, keep up with you? Talk to me.
Yeah, you can find me, follow me on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty. Go over to analyticsofdynasty.com. That'll get you covered with all my goings on. Again, you can find the book at analyticsdynasty.com/shop. Use the promo code Depot, and go ahead and subscribe and become a member of the site and get the Dynasty Daily podcast. I think it'll be worth it over the long term of the season.
Thank you, Jordan. Heather, give me a quickie Dynasty Depot commercial.
Okay, so go to dynastydepot.com, enter the promo code LIVE for 75% off any membership. So it's dynastydepot.com, promo code LIVE, LIVE, for 75% off any membership.
Awesome, Heather. Thank you. And where can people find Dynasty Depot?
Okay, so you can follow us on Twitter at the Dynasty Depot, Facebook on Dynasty Depot, TikTok, which I recommend you go check that out if you haven't yet, because Nelson has made his debut on there and it's pretty fantastic. It is. So TikTok is Dynasty Depot and Insta is the Dynasty Depot.
Awesome. Thank you. Next week, we have one of the biggest high-stakes players in the country. Nelson Sousa is going to be joining us. We are going to be talking player profiles, nothing but high-stakes stuff. Might not be a ton of Dynasty talk next week. We're going to get into the money stuff and get it going next week. That is it for this week, my friends. I thank our guest, Jordan McNamara, Fantasy Heather, Borgata Brett, of course, my partner, Ruthless Rick. I'm Nelson Burbett. Buy lie. Don't lie. Buy low, sell high, my friends. We're out. Peace.
You've been listening to the Dynasty Depot podcast, the best source for what's hot in Dynasty Fantasy Football team action. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at the Dynasty Depot. And listeners get a 30-day free rookie membership. Go to dynastydepot.com and use promo code PODCAST. Dynasty Depot. Bid, buy, sell, dominate.